Yeah, I'm as surprised as you are that I'm back so soon. But I got something in the mail today, and I don't know. I felt inspired enough to make a quick video. If I can get it out of the box here. There's this guy. The KM Tools Jig Square. Patent pending. If you find yourself in the woodworking YouTube space, the KM of KM Tools is Jonathan Katz-Moses. Fairly popular. Like I said, if you've been in the woodworking space in YouTube, you very likely have seen or heard from him or of him. But this is my first time directly buying one of his tools, and honestly, it's one of the first times I've ever bought like a setup jig of any kind, let alone one that has kind of a burgundy or red hue. You'll notice there's no woodpecker stuff hiding behind me. And it came at sort of a fortuitous time. I've been meaning to remake my Crosscut Sled for a while now. Just haven't really had the energy to do it. I don't love the fiddliness of getting it straight and flat against that fence. Just let me show you my old one here. It's a little beat up, a little worse for wear. But it served me pretty well. And some of the things with it just aren't my favorite anymore. The fence on the back is not really sturdy enough. It wiggles. I don't even know if it's flat. No, there's a noticeable hump right at the blade. So suffice to say, it's time for this thing to get an upgrade. And I guess we'll also get a sort of a review out of this in the meantime. So without further ado, I'm just going to walk through how I'm going to build this sled. I'm just using some plywood scraps. And I'm hoping this won't take me too long because it's a Thursday afternoon when I'm recording this, and I have work in the morning, and I kind of want this to be a one evening build. So with that, I'm going to get to it. This little light. The dimensions are not terribly important. You just want it to be squarish, and this is one of the last offcuts I had. It should be like 2 by 4. Just over 2 feet by just over 4 feet. You can have it if you want to have a crosscut sled that's got more cutting depth. If you plan on cross-cutting wider boards, you can start with something wider than this. If you want to be mostly cutting smaller parts, you can make a smaller sled. This, I'm going to keep it roughly 2 feet wide, and I'm just going to cut this down to 3 feet. But for the front fence, I've got a couple pieces of 1/2-inch ply that I'm going to laminate once I rip these down. And then the last bit, just to get it to match everything else I've done here, is I'm going to be putting on the cross-cut sled surface leftover Formica from my tabletop here and my other counters around the shop on top of the cabinets. Mostly so that if glue or anything gets on it, I know I can just swipe that off and then I'm back to having a nice, clean surface. I've loved having it on top of my countertops. It makes it so easy to clean them up. So that's it. Yep, I'm just using a couple pieces of scrap plywood here. I'm going to start by cutting this to dimension. And then I'm going to rip these down to hopefully more manageable widths. These are just over 7 inches, and I feel like a 3-inch fence is pretty good. And now this is 2 and about 1/4 inches. Yeah, all right, let me clear this stuff off and get to cutting. We've got my fence cut down to width. Now I just gotta cut it to length. The base of the sled is done. And then I planed down some of this leftover ply actually from this one instead of from the base here, because I needed to make sure it was slightly shallower than the miter tracks. Cool, let's head over to the miter saw and get these cut. We've got our fence cut to width and length. The only problem is it's still in 4 pieces right now. So that's where this is going to come in, as well as a bunch of wood glue. I want to make sure when I glue it up, they are directly in a line, nice and straight. And I don't want to have to use all of my clamps to keep this pressed down tight for the whole time that I'm going. So I'm going to use some screws to facilitate that process. We got these drilled through. I went and countersunk some holes so I'd know which ones to screw into. And then I realized the only screws I had of the right length were cabinet screws. So that was a waste of time, but that's okay. The idea of going through all that drilling is, well, we're going to find out how well I did at measuring and lining those up. It would have been nice if I'd had a big tall fence to just line all 4 of them up, but I didn't. So we should have these here in a nice straight line. Okay, that is looking good. Ah, dang it. Not quite perfectly flat. It's not quite perfectly flat. And that was the goal of doing all this. I wanted to clamp it all up and then have it be nice and flush, and then I wouldn't have to do anything to flatten this out. So what I'm going to do to deal with that is I'm going to end up, once I'm done gluing it up, is run it through my jointer back there. And if you don't have a jointer, first of all, it's a great tool, highly recommended. But if you don't have the space, you don't want to do one, but you do have a table saw, you can do the same thing here. I'm just going to run one side of it up against my fence, and then you do a really shallow cut just to true up that edge, and then you flip it over and do the same thing. And in fact, you can just do it on one side, because all I care about is that the bottom side that's mating with this is perfectly flat, because I want to make sure it's glued down nice and even all the way across. I'm going to get some glue on here, clamp it up, and then the fence will be ready to go. I'm also going to do the same thing with this fence material back here. I'm going to cut some strips and glue those up, but it's going to be the same process, but I'm going to skip the screws part. I'm just going to, I'm going to laminate some more boards, get these glued, and let that start sitting, and then we'll come back and finish making the crosscut sled. Well, while that's gluing up, there's no reason we can't still be productive. So I'm going to start ripping this down to fit into our miter slots. Should be 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to go just wide of that. my hand plane here. And just do a couple passes. One pass. There we go. No play, but it moves freely. That's what we're looking for. So we can just drop the sled down. And we'll put some wax on it too when we're done. But now we've got our slides to put our sled on top of. Yep, that's gonna be great. We have our rails cut to length. I cut them slightly, I mean like ever so slightly shorter than the width of my Crosscut Sled's base, just because I'd rather the rails be tucked in than sticking out from it in case I'm off by just a hair. And the way we're going to get these attached is quite simple. I'll move this out of the way. I'm going to go grab some washers. All right, should have grabbed these ahead of time. So I've got some washers here that are all just, try to find ones that are the same thickness. And the reason I'm putting these in here is I just need these rails, slides, whatever you want to call them, to stick up a hair above the surface of the table saw. Which, that is a hair. Yeah, that ought to do it. So when I've got these in, I'm just going to set them level with the edge of the table saw. I'm just going to use some super glue to tack these in place, because I'm going to drive some screws through it in a minute here. Shouldn't need a lot of glue. Spray the accelerant on the other side here. And line it up with my fence to try and keep this square. It's not actually critical at this stage that the sled is square to the table exactly, because that's the point of when we set the fence up, having it all right. It just makes it look nice, so you know if the sled, when it's sliding, is square. But, yep. Ha! Look at that. We got those on there. Now let's see how thick is that. We're at 1 1/8. So if we get 1-inch screws, we can screw them right in there and attach this without any pesky screws poking up through the crosscut sled. So let's grab a drill and some screws. All right, it's been about an hour. Let's get these out of the clamps. Okay, let's see. Did clamping to a straight edge pay off or not? Let me grab my precision ground straight edge and check both of these. Well, that's pretty much dead flat now, ain't it? Yep, I cannot see light through that. Awesome. All right, let me do a little bit of cleanup on these. I'm just going to run them through the jointer and clean up some of that glue, and then we'll keep moving on. Earlier, I pulled out my riving knife, and this is the moment for why I did that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a plunging cut up, and then I'm going to push forward right up to the line here. And that's the part where once I have my fence ready, I'm going to try out this little katz-moses jig. I know, we're deep enough in the video, I almost had forgotten about it. But this is the piece where it's going to come in. But first, we've got to make that cut, so let's do that. Fence doesn't have to be perfectly 90 to the blade. We're not really referencing anything off of it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to drill and screw it in. All right. Flip it over. There we go. We now have our rear fence in place. The way this works is we have a perfectly flat space here with 90 degrees, and it's got these little teeth. I guess teeth? I don't know what to call them. But they bite into the kerf of that cut we just made. And you turn this little knob. You don't really want to crank it, but you just square it up against that. It's now kind of wedged into that kerf and holds this 90 degrees to it. So now all we need to do is clamp up and then drill our screws in and we're done. The fence is at 90. So let's do that real quick. I'll be honest, that was easier than I thought it would be. I mean, I knew it was going to be hopefully easier than having to like put a screw in, make cuts, dial it in, adjust. But this really was pain-free. This was super easy. Was it $140 easy? I guess we'll see over time if I make more jigs, if I end up using it more. But it definitely works as advertised. But let's put that to the test. So to be clear, if you're making a crosscut sled, you can. This is it. You're done. There's a little bit more I'm going to do. I'm going to put some T-track in here, and I'm going to put some Formica on the top here. So what that means is I'm going to actually end up taking these screws out, contact cementing that in, and then refinishing. First, I want to see how square this fence really is. I'm going to try it with a little bit of a bigger piece. Does this fit in every direction? No, but that's what the crosscut sled is for. We'll cut it, and then we'll go from there. If you're not familiar with the 5-cut method, that's what I'm going to be going through and doing here. And basically what the 5-cut method is I'm going to make one cut here, then I'm going to rotate it, cut here, rotate it, cut here, rotate it, cut here, and then make one more cut in this direction and measure with calipers each end of that piece. You do 5 cuts as opposed to just cutting 2 slices, is it helps compound the error. So if you're off by half a degree in the first cut, then half a degree, then half a degree, half a degree, you're now off by 2 degrees. It's way easier to see and measure. And then you can use calculators that are online. In fact, the maker of this tool here, at KM Tools, I think at kmtools.com, they have a 5-cut method calculator. Before I do this part, I want to be crystal clear that I'm not sponsored. Obviously, look at how small my channel is. I bought this with my own money. It showed up today, and I jumped in the workshop and started working on it. So I'm hoping that this will come out accurate because I don't want to have to redo any of this. But if it's not, I'll let you know. So let's get cutting. So we've done our 5 cuts, and what happens next is we use these calipers here, and we're going to measure, gotta get it turned on first, 1.5505 this ending, 1.5535 this end. And then we measure the length, 16, and it is 3/16 on the dot. And then we measure the distance from the cut to our pivot point, which is the first screw in your fence, which is where you would be adjusting from. And I can measure that as 9 1/16 on the dot, like not even, like in the line. And we punch those numbers into the katz-moses calculator, and the final result is that we would need to move our fence 0.001 inches in order for it to be like perfectly square. And if I'm within 3 zeros or whatever, that's plenty flat enough for me. So as far as first impressions go for a jig that is advertised as having kind of one job, I am very impressed. To be fair, $140 for a very precise 90 degrees crosscut. I don't know if I'd go so far as I'm impressed enough to say it's like 100% worth it, but especially if you make multiple crosscut sleds or you're often finding yourself making jigs where you need a fence that's 90 degrees to it. It's interesting, a tool like this. It's so specific in its purpose that I don't know how to say whether or not it's worth the money, because it's going to really depend on if this is a task that's important to you. And so if you find yourself doing that a lot, I don't know of any other comparable tool on the market. I don't know of anything else out there that this would be competing with, and it does its job very, very well. From that regard, I'd say it's definitely worth checking out, and then whether it's worth the price, I think is going to have to be up to you. But first impressions are very good. It clearly does what it's set out to do. For the rest of this sled, I'm going to kind of build montage speed through it. I'm going to be putting the Formica top on, and then putting the top back on and screwing in some T-track, and then some beauty shots. Should be pretty quick. And then we'll wrap things up. But if you were here to get my impressions on the katz-moses jig, there you go. Thank you all for watching. And yeah, we'll finish with that build montage and some beauty shots. Thanks for checking in. I know this is sort of a weird video. The audio might be weird. It was very spur of the moment, not a planned video at all. So thanks for checking it out, and I'll see you on the other side.